You wake up at 3 a.m. with a cold, heavy pressure deep in your calves that makes your legs feel like lead against the sheets. It started as a faint tingling months ago, but now it's a daily struggle that follows you from the bedroom to the kitchen. You've lived with this thickening fog in your mind for so long you've forgotten what it feels like to be sharp. You've tried rubbing expensive ointments and even doubled your water intake. Yet the heaviness remains. What if this agonizing slowness isn't your body failing, but your system sounding a desperate alarm about something you've overlooked? In the next few minutes, you'll understand what's really happening. My name is Arthur Penhaligon, a 71-year-old retired structural engineer who spent 40 years calculating the load-bearing capacity of Midwestern bridges. I always believed that if the foundation was solid, the structure would never fail, a philosophy I applied to everything except my own heart. It has been 4 years since my beloved Martha passed away from a sudden stroke, leaving a silence in our home that no work could fill. I keep her silver-rimmed reading glasses on the nightstand and occasionally press her floral scarves to my face to catch a fading scent of her jasmine perfume. My failure to protect her that night remains my deepest wound, driving my need to ensure our family's financial legacy stays unbreakable. My life now orbits around my son, Mark, a gentle high school teacher, and my 7-year-old grandson, Leo, who is my entire world. We share our home with Mark's wife, Tiffany, who joined our family 3 years ago and seemingly became a pillar of support during my recent decline. My routine is simple. Tuesday mornings at the diner, followed by checking the Martha Fund at the bank and wood turning in my garage. Before we move forward, I want to thank you for your support. Please comment below, letting me know which city you are watching from. Please note that while inspired by true events, certain elements have been fictionalized for privacy and dramatic impact. The next morning, I retreated to my garage, seeking the familiar scent of cedar and the steady hum of my lathe to drown out the echoes of the bank manager's voice. I was rummaging through the overflowing scrap bin for my favorite caliper when a splash of gold caught my eye amidst the sawdust and discarded shavings. It was a heavy, cream-colored card from First National Bank, celebrating our 40-year anniversary as gold clients. Tiffany usually handles all the mail to spare me the stress, so seeing this in the trash felt like finding a structural flaw in a primary support beam. The card congratulated me on a recent major transaction that had unlocked exclusive rewards. I stared at the embossed gold lettering, trying to rationalize why such a prestigious notification would be discarded like common waste. Perhaps it was just a misunderstanding, or maybe Tiffany was planning a lavish surprise for Mark's upcoming birthday, or perhaps a new car for the family. But as I flipped the card over, I noticed a handwritten extension for Mr. Henderson, a direct line that bypassed the automated system I usually struggled with. A cold, prickling sensation crawled up my neck, a silent alarm that my engineering instincts couldn't ignore. Why hide a celebration? I tucked the card into my pocket, the weight of it suddenly feeling heavier than any lead pipe I'd ever handled. I returned to our house on Elmwood Avenue, moving with the measured caution of an inspector traversing a bridge with a suspected hairline fracture. Tiffany was in the kitchen, her voice a melodic chime as she sang a lullaby to Leo, a sound that now made my stomach tighten into a hard, cold knot. I retreated to my private study, locking the heavy oak door and sitting before the mahogany desk where Martha and I had planned our lives. My hands were clammy as I pulled out my logbook, where I recorded every penny spent since June 1985. I needed to see the data myself before I could believe the structural failure of my family. I spent the next 3 hours cross-referencing my handwritten notes with the digital snapshots I had secretly taken of the bank monitor earlier that morning. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird as I noticed a glaring discrepancy from November 14th, 2025. A date I remember vividly because it was the anniversary of our first date at the Blue Ribbon Diner. According to the bank, a wire transfer of $45,000 had been executed to a destination labeled Vance Holdings, a name I had never heard in my 71 years of life. I felt the floor beneath my feet shifting, a tectonic movement of betrayal that threatened to swallow the foundation of my retirement. The anomaly wasn't just a single transaction. It was a rhythmic, calculated bleeding of my life's work that had been disguised with surgical precision. I discovered that on the third Tuesday of every month for the last year, smaller amounts ranging from $3,000 to $5,000 had been siphoned off, always right after Tiffany brought me my afternoon chamomile tea. A cold sweat broke across my brow as I realized these dates aligned perfectly with the days I felt most foggy and disoriented, periods I had attributed to my aging mind. The realization hit me with the force of a falling steel beam. My daughter-in-law was systematically altering my perception of reality to cover her tracks. I knew I couldn't navigate this minefield alone, so I arranged a clandestine meeting with James Henderson at the back booth of the Silver Spoon Cafe on Thursday morning. James, the 52-year-old son of my late business partner, looked more like a worried nephew than a high-ranking bank manager as he slid a thick manila envelope across the laminate table. He had risked his professional reputation to pull these internal records, his eyes darting toward the door as if he expected a structural collapse at any moment. "Arthur, what I found goes far beyond a simple withdrawal," he whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and profound respect for the man who taught him how to fish. He opened the envelope to reveal a copy of a power of attorney document dated March 12, 2024, a paper I had never signed or even seen before that second. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the signature at the bottom, my eyes burning with a sudden, sharp sting of grief and fury. It was Martha's elegant, looping cursive, a script I knew better than my own name. But Martha had been buried for years when this document was supposedly executed. Tiffany had forged my name, desecrating the memory of my deceased wife by using her handwriting to grant herself total control over every cent I owned. I felt a surge of righteous anger. James leaned in closer, his knuckles white as he pointed to a secondary name listed as a beneficiary on a hidden sub-account I didn't even know existed. The name Julian Thorne appeared in cold, black ink next to Tiffany's, linked to a series of encrypted transfers to an offshore bank in the Cayman Islands totaling $200,000. This wasn't a solo operation. Tiffany was part of a larger, more sophisticated network that had been planning this liquidation long before she ever walked through our front door. The conspiracy was expanding like a crack in a dam, and I realized that my son, Mark, might be living with a professional predator instead of a loving wife. The investigation took a terrifyingly personal turn when James showed me a blurred security photo from the bank's drive-through pharmacy taken last week, showing Tiffany smiling at the camera. In her hand was a prescription bottle for a powerful sedative, a medication I had never been prescribed by my primary physician, Dr. Aristone, at the Mercy Heights Medical Center. My skin crawled as I thought about the bitter aftertaste of the tea Tiffany served me every afternoon, with such loving care and a practiced smile. Each sip was a calculated dose of chemical manipulation, a slow-motion attempt to render me incompetent so the authorities would never believe my story when the final blow eventually came for my legacy. I returned home that evening, the weight of the manila envelope hidden beneath my coat feeling like a ticking bomb against my chest as I crossed the threshold. Tiffany was standing at the top of the stairs, her silhouette framed by the hallway light, watching me with an intensity that made the hair on my arms stand up. She asked me where I had been with a forced casualness that didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes, and for a moment, I feared she could smell the scent of the bank's ink on my skin. I forced a weak, senile smile, playing the part of the confused old man she wanted while my mind calculated her destruction. The risk had shifted from my bank account to my survival, and I knew that every hour I spent in this house was a gamble with a woman who saw me as an obstacle. I watched her walk into the kitchen to prepare dinner, wondering if my son was her next victim or her unwitting accomplice in this cruel design. I need to know what you think because I am standing at a crossroads, and my next move must be perfect to save my grandson. Please participate in our poll right now. Do you believe my son, Mark, is secretly involved in this scheme, or is he just another victim? Vote now. Mark is involved. Mark is a victim. I spent the next 48 hours in a fever of cold, analytical calculation, mapping the digital outflow from the Martha Fund, like a surveyor charting a sinking coastline. Every time Tiffany left the house to run errands for Leo, I was back at my desk, my fingers trembling as I bypassed the parental locks she had installed on my laptop. I discovered a hidden partition in our shared cloud storage containing high-resolution scans of my medical records from the Mercy Heights Medical Center. These weren't just records. They were meticulously altered PDF files where my actual blood pressure readings had been swapped with fabricated reports suggesting early-onset vascular dementia. The level of technical sophistication required for this forgery proved Tiffany wasn't acting alone in this demolition. The deeper I dug into the structural vulnerabilities of her plan, the more I realized I was facing a professional demolition crew rather than a lone opportunist. I found a series of encrypted emails sent to a user named jthorn88, containing photos of my private safe and the specific model of my home security system. Julian Thorne wasn't just a secret lover. He was an architect of digital theft who specialized in erasing the identities of the elderly across 3 different states. My research at the local library's public terminal revealed that Tiffany Rossi and Tiffany Chen had left a trail of ruined lives in Ohio and Michigan before arriving here. The conspiracy was a recurring pattern, a systemic failure of trust designed to leave victims powerless. On Saturday afternoon, while Tiffany was at the park with Leo, I ventured into the attic, moving with the silent precision of a bridge inspector checking a rusted joint. Hidden inside a vintage suitcase belonging to my late wife, I found a black leather satchel containing 3 different driver's licenses, each bearing Tiffany's face, but under different names. Beneath the false identities lay a thick stack of pre-signed blank checks from my secondary credit line, a fund I hadn't touched since Martha's funeral. The realization that she had been desecrating Martha's personal belongings to hide her criminal tools felt like a hammer blow to my solar plexus. This was no longer just about the money. It was a total violation of my family's sanctity. The danger shifted from my bank account to my very heartbeat during dinner that evening, when Tiffany placed a steaming bowl of beef stew before me. She watched me with a predatory stillness, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder as she urged me to eat every spoonful for my strength. I noticed a tiny crystalline residue clinging to the rim of my water glass, a detail my engineering eyes couldn't ignore despite the dim lighting. My throat constricted as I realized she was no longer just sedating me. She was increasing the dosage to accelerate my perceived mental decline before the bank's quarterly audit. I had to pretend to eat while secretly disposing of the poisoned meal in my cloth napkin. A sudden notification on my phone, which I had secretly unmuted, revealed that a new mortgage application had been filed against my house on Elmwood Avenue. Tiffany had used the forged power of attorney to leverage the equity of my only remaining asset, a home I had spent 30 years paying off. The total loan amount was $500,000, scheduled to be disbursed into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands by Monday morning. If that transaction cleared, I wouldn't just be poor, I would be homeless and legally incompetent to fight the eviction. The walls of the life I had built were crumbling inward, and the deadline for total structural collapse was less than 48 hours away. Living in the same house with a woman who was actively trying to erase my existence required a level of emotional fortitude I didn't know I possessed. I had to maintain the facade of the confused old man, stumbling over my words and forgetting where I placed my spectacles to keep her overconfident. Every time she touched my arm or called me sweetheart, I felt a surge of visceral revulsion that threatened to break my professional composure. The psychological stress of the masquerade was a heavy load, testing the very limits of my internal support beams as I waited for the right moment to strike. I watched her through the cracked doorway of my study, a silent judge observing a criminal. The most devastating revelation occurred when I found a hidden recording device taped to the underside of the kitchen table, capturing every conversation I had with Mark. Tiffany wasn't just stealing my money. She was systematically poisoning my son's mind by playing back-edited clips that made me sound aggressive and delusional. I heard my own voice, chopped and rearranged, telling Mark that I wanted to sell the house and move away without saying goodbye to Leo. The cruelty of this manipulation was the ultimate structural failure, a calculated attempt to sever the bond between father and son. I realized then that Tiffany didn't just want my wealth. She wanted to leave me with absolutely nothing but my grief. I contacted Detective Marcus Thorne on Sunday night, using a burner phone I had purchased with cash during my morning walk to the hardware store. Marcus, who still remembered the scholarship recommendation I wrote for him 15 years ago, confirmed that Julian Thorne was currently staying at a motel near the border. They were planning to move the final liquidated assets by midnight on Tuesday, leaving Mark and me in the rubble of a foreclosed life. I provided him with the high-resolution scans of the forged power of attorney and the evidence of the microdosing I had collected. We began coordinating a sting operation that would trap them both at the very moment they attempted to cross the point of no return. As I sit here in the dark, watching the shadows of the woman who betrayed my family dance across the hallway, I realize the true extent of the horror. What I am about to show you in the next few minutes is deeply disturbing and may be difficult for some of you to process. This isn't just a story about a bank account. It is a warning about how easily a predator can infiltrate the most sacred spaces of our lives. If you are not prepared to see the cold, calculated face of evil unmasked, you might want to turn away now. For the rest of you, stay focused, because the truth is about to be revealed. This is your final warning before the truth comes out. The medical file I decrypted on the burner phone wasn't just a list of forged signatures. It was a digital blueprint of my own assassination. I stared at the screen as the chemical composition of the vitamins Tiffany gave me every morning flashed in high-resolution detail. It wasn't just a sedative. It was a calculated cocktail of beta blockers and neurosuppressants designed to mimic the exact symptoms of vascular dementia. Every time I felt my legs grow heavy or my words slur during dinner, I thought I was losing my mind to the inevitable decay of age. In reality, I was being dismantled from the inside out, one spoonful of beef stew at a time, by a predator I called family. A cold, visceral nausea surged through my gut, making my hands shake with a rhythmic violence that had nothing to do with my supposed illness. I clutched the edge of the mahogany desk, feeling the smooth wood beneath my sweating palms as my engineering brain reevaluated every physical failure of the last year. The fog I blamed for my confusion wasn't a structural collapse of my brain, but a chemical arson committed against my nervous system. I could feel the bitter residue of the afternoon tea coating my tongue like a layer of corrosive rust. My heart hammered against my ribs, not in fear, but in a primitive, righteous fury that burned away the chemical haze clouding my vision. But the most devastating crack in the foundation appeared when I scrolled to the bottom of the encrypted folder and found a file dated 4 years ago. It was a digital receipt from an online pharmacy for the same neurosuppressants, purchased just 1 week before Martha's sudden stroke. My breath hitched in my throat as the memory of that night returned with a terrifying, sharpened clarity. Tiffany had been our neighbor then, the helpful nurse who rushed over to help before the paramedics arrived. The realization hit me like a falling beam. Martha's death wasn't a natural tragedy, but a successful pilot program for the liquidation I was currently experiencing. This woman was my wife's executioner. The love I once felt for my son's wife evaporated, replaced by a cold, analytical desire for structural demolition. I stood up, my spine straightening as I shed the skin of the confused old man she thought she had mastered. The masquerade was over, and the predator was about to become the prey in a trap she helped me build with her arrogance. I looked at the security camera, knowing she was watching, but she had no idea the senile grandfather was actually the judge. Before I step out to face her, I need to know you are with me. Comment present now if you are ready for the confrontation. The morning air at First National Bank was heavy with the metallic scent of impending rain as I sat in the glass-walled lobby, my fingers tracing the cold gold emblem on Martha's reading glasses. James Henderson stood behind the counter, his eyes fixed on the entrance with a predator's focus, while Detective Marcus Thorne leaned against a marble pillar, disguised as a casual investor in a gray raincoat. We had orchestrated a perfect structural trap, timed to the exact second the $500,000 mortgage wire was scheduled to initiate. My internal calculations were precise, leaving no room for a collapse. I wasn't the trembling, medicated grandfather she had spent months constructing. I was the architect of her total demolition. Tiffany entered the lobby at 10:02 a.m., her lavender dress a calculated mask of innocence as she guided Mark toward the teller window with a practiced, gentle hand. She smiled at James, her voice a melodic chime as she requested the final transfer authorization, unaware that the transaction was a digital dead end. I stood up from the shadows of the alcove, my legs steady, and my gaze locked onto her cold, widening eyes. The silence that followed was a physical weight, a total vacuum of sound that stripped away her carefully curated facade in front of the dozen witnesses now watching. The foundation of her deception had reached its ultimate stress point under my unwavering stare. "Arthur, you're confused again. Let's get you home," Tiffany whispered, her hands trembling as she reached for my arm with a desperate, patronizing smile meant for the onlookers. She turned to Mark, her eyes brimming with artificial tears as she claimed my vascular dementia had reached a violent, delusional peak that morning. It was a masterful attempt at structural reinforcement, a lie designed to redirect the pressure back onto my perceived fragility. But as James Henderson slid the forged power of attorney across the marble counter, her voice cracked, the pitch rising into a shrill, defensive frequency. She was no longer a caretaker. She was a cornered animal, realizing the cage was already bolted. I pulled the black leather satchel from my coat, dropping the 3 false driver's licenses and Martha's original wedding ring onto the polished surface with a deafening clatter. Tiffany's face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred, the soft pastel mask dissolving into the jagged reality of a career predator. "You old fossil, you were supposed to be dead months ago," she screamed, her confession echoing off the high ceilings like a structural failure. She admitted to the microdosing and the systematic liquidation of my life's work, her words a toxic flood of resentment toward a man she viewed as nothing more than a profitable obstacle to her luxury. Detective Marcus Thorne stepped forward, his badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights as he barked the Miranda rights, his voice a hammer blow of finality. Tiffany was forced against the cold marble, her wrists locked in steel as Marcus listed the felony counts of aggravated grand larceny, medical endangerment, and identity theft. The secondary unit intercepted Julian Thorne at the Border Motel, seizing the $200,000 in laundered cash destined for the Cayman Islands. Her nursing license was revoked on the spot, and the state prosecutor later confirmed a mandatory 25-year sentence without the possibility of parole. The recovery of the $800,000 had begun, the liquidation process finally reversed. Mark collapsed into a chair, his face buried in his hands as the realization of his wife's monstrous design finally shattered his heart. I walked over and placed my hand on his shoulder, the steady strength of my grip providing the only support beam left in his crumbling world. Outside the glass doors, the storm finally broke, a torrential downpour washing the grime from the city streets as the gray clouds began to fracture. As I watched the police cruiser pull away with Tiffany, I felt the internal pressure of 4 years of grief finally equalize. The air felt lighter, the structural integrity of my family's name restored, and for once, the silence was peaceful. It has been 8 months since the sirens faded, and the structural integrity of our home on Elmwood Avenue has finally been restored. My son, Mark, spent the afternoon in the garage with me, helping sand a new cedar rocking chair for Leo's 8th birthday. We don't speak of the betrayal often, but the silence between us is no longer heavy. It is a shared foundation built on transparency and healing. I still keep Martha's silver-rimmed glasses on the nightstand, but now they represent a legacy preserved rather than a wound unhealed. We are poorer in dollars, but richer in truth, proving that a family built on solid ground can survive even the most calculated demolition. You might think your foundations are unbreakable, but I am here to tell you that a snake doesn't hiss before it strikes. It smiles. In this life, integrity is the only load-bearing wall that never fails, even when the world tries to bury you under the weight of greed. God sees the truth behind every mask, and He expects us to stay sharp and protect the vulnerable from those who see aging as a white flag. Please share this story to warn others, comment strong to show your support, and subscribe for more accounts of justice. This story was inspired by real events but dramatized for privacy. Never let a predator's smile cost you your eternal soul.